Hello friend, thank you for stopping by my channel. Today we'll do some programming together. So in our previous sessions we had created a simple setup to run and solve LeetCode problems locally. We are using the programming language Java, and the setup that we are using is Visual Studio Code for editing and Gradle for building. And we intend to keep the setup very simple, and we don't have any debugging support, so every debugging that we want to do we try to do via the print statement. And let's see how we can solve more problems and learn more topics about Java in this new session. So today we are going to learn about ArrayList. ArrayList is the most important data structure in Java, and it is being used in solving a lot of the problems. It has a bunch of functionalities. So let's see what it actually is. So I am showing the documentation page that we have, and what it tells is an array list is a resizable array implementation of the list interface. It implements all optional list operations and permits all elements, including null. So in short, array list is a dynamic array. So basically all the elements, it's a collection interface. So you can store some elements into array list. It's a useful data structure. And inside that, you don't need to be worried about the number of elements that are there from the very beginning. For example, if you have worked with array, you know, like you have to declare the number of elements that you're going to store. ArrayList is going to take care of that. Underneath its interfaces, it's saving it into an array, but what it's doing, the APIs that it exposes, the user does not need to be, or the programmer in this case, does not need to be concerned about the underlying implementation, and the programmer can simply create the whatever functionality that he or she wants using the API. So for that, to explore the features of ArrayList, what we are going to create is basically a simple class locally. So let's call this class myArrayList. In here, we are basically trying to explore various features of the SDK ArrayList class. So let's define a constructor here, and we'll have a static method called explore. And the entry point will be from our main function, where we'll just call the explore. So let's see what we can do with an array list. So first of all, we need to import the interface. Or rather create this import statement so that the compiler can understand. And our class will contain an array list underneath. It's an array list of string, so let's call it just array list with a lower cap a. In the constructor, what we do is we initialize this array list. So once we initialize, we don't have to mention that it's a type of string, because the compiler will understand from the context where it's running, and it'll basically infer its type. What we can do is put some elements into it. So let's do it by, either we can add the elements one by one. So we can do something like ArrayList add 1, and we can copy the same statement multiple times. like this, and or we can have an array or we can have a string array where we have each of these elements, and then we can add these elements by iterating over the array. So we can just keep it like this. It's the same thing. At this time, we have initialized the array list. So let's actually, from our explore method, let's call this array list. So we call it my array list, new my array list. And the first function that we want to try out is we want to add new element to it. So if we add a new element, say 4, to this, and we're basically wrapping the API add function into a function that we are creating here. So we are creating a function which takes a string and it just adds to the underlying array list. So the array list has an array underneath, our class has an array list under it. Something like that. Another function that we want to create is printing the contents of the array list. So let's see how we can do that. So let's call this function print all. In here, we are going to use an iterator that is underneath that array list. So let's see what does this do. So since our array list is of type string, we'll have an iterator of style string. So let's call it iter, and our array list is called just the array list, and we'll call the array list and then the iterator method on top of that. Then what will we do is we'll just iterate over the iterator. We'll just print to the console what are the values that are inside that the iterator provides, and we'll print them in a line, and after the line we'll just print a new line. At this point, I think we can just test our function. If we have made any mistakes, how does it work? So let's try the print all function here. So we got some error. Let's see what these errors are. So it says cannot find symbol iterator because we have to create a declaration for iterator. Right, and then we clear the screen and run the same command again. So now if you see, actually we made a mistake here. Ideally it should be print so that every element is in one line. Now we have all the elements 1, 2, 3, 4 in one line. Let's say we want to add multiple elements at one go. To explore that, in this case, for example, we want to duplicate the elements that are there in the same array list. So let's call the function duplicate. In here, what we will do is we'll basically add this array list on top of itself. So we won't iterate over it. What we will do is we'll call ArrayList, then call add all ArrayList. So let's try to do that, and after that we'll print them. Let's see what we find here. We get an exception. Yeah, we forgot the return type of the method. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4 and 1, 2, 3, 4. Now let's go back to our references and see what all methods we can explore. So there are a bunch of methods that the ArrayList has, and we won't explore all of them, but some of them. So for example, iterator we have already explored. There is get, there is set. So this is actually some important methods that we will need a lot of the times. So get method and set method. So let's actually do that in one simple function called explore get set. So in here, explore get set, what we will do is basically we'll first see what are the elements, how many elements are there. So the method to know that is called size. Similar to in array, where we have length as a member variable, or in string we have the length. In here we have the size. For ArrayList we have the size. What we want to do here, since our ArrayList is a list of string, we can get each element and print their length. That should be a good one. So let's do that. What we will do here is we'll iterate over the list, and for each element we will print their length. So ArrayList supports for each kind of statement, so we don't have to create an index and do all those things. We can do this thing, but for the sake of let's actually first print this, then we can try to do it in a different way. Got it. So here we see that the size of ArrayList is 8, and then it prints the length of each of the string 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4 has length 4, 3 has length 5, 1 has length 3, and so on. So instead of doing a for each, we can also do it via the index, the usual for loop that we are aware of. In here we can actually use the size as an upper bound, and now to access each of the element we have to access it via the index. Similarly we do in an array. In an array we do that box operator where we pass the index value and we get the element back. Here instead we have the get function. So if we do this and run it, it will give the same output. So both of these things are same, but the earlier one is obviously less verbose. What if we want to set some value for each of these elements? So let's say we want to add their length to the actual string. So we'll create this loop, and inside this loop what we will do is do ArrayList set for index I. We get the list, get the string. Actually let's get the string beforehand in separately. So let's say I have this, I have string s at index I. So what I'll do is at index I, I'll put the length of the string, append it to its end. Right, so let's clear it and try to run it. We see a failure. We forgot the semicolon there. Let's try to run once again. We don't see any output because we need a print all to see the new contents of the list. So now we have the new list where their length is appended to the elements. So this is one way we can use the set function. The other useful function is empty. So let's actually search for is empty here. Go to is empty. So it's the usual collection method. It's a boolean. If there are no elements, it will return true. If there are elements, it will return false. There are other functions, for example, contains, where you pass another object. For example, let's actually try contains on our particular example. Let's say this one. We'll pass this. We'll have this. And what we will do is we'll just print if the element is there. Let's just print the boolean value. Contains string. Okay. Let's see what it returns. So it says that it does not contain the element. But we actually, we actually modified the elements. So let's pass the different value. This time it says it actually contains the elements. Similar to contains, we have the remove function. So if, for example, if it contains it, we'll want to remove it. So remove, there are two ways you can remove elements from an array list. You can remove element at a specified index, or you can remove an element by an object. So the comparison that happens between two objects is by their hash code. If we have string, we know that if we have two different strings, their hash code will be same. But if we are using a custom object, their equality will be dependent on the hash code function that you are writing. If two objects contain the same data, their hash codes should be same. Then Java will be able to identify that two objects are same. So let's try actually try to remove them. So if let's first actually see what will happen if we remove without try to remove the element which is not there. So this should say contains is false, and if we do print all, nothing happens. The list remains same. But if I pass a valid string which is there inside the list, it just removes the first element. So let's see what the function definition says. It says removes the first occurrence of the specified element from the list if it is present. If the list does not contain, it is unchanged. So it basically just removes the element with the lowest index. So if you want to remove all instances, then let's see if there is any function called remove all. So remove all contains only if you have another array list. So if you have another array list and you want to remove all the collections, all the elements that are there in the array list, that we can do by calling, say, remove all ArrayList. So this is exactly the same thing as in doing ArrayList dot clear when you want to remove all the elements in the list. So let's see, and at this time print all, the last one returns empty. So that's, I think, the most of the things that we need to learn about ArrayList. There is one more thing. Since we are a lot of times we want to work with array, what happens if we need an array back from the ArrayList? So there are two ways, and both the functions are called toArray. One without any parameter. In here it just returns an array containing all the elements in the list in proper sequence from first to last. And the other part is, and the type of the element returned is object. So let's actually explore this toArray function a bit more. So we have toArray. In here, the return type of the array will be object array. So let me call it objects, and I'll say ArrayList toArray. And let's see, using our arrays toString method, we'll try to print them. The same printing that we were doing with print all, we can do with the standard library arrays utility. So let's see, we have toArray, and let's call this function. Okay. So are we removing the elements? Yeah, we should not remove the elements. Let's comment out the remove section and run once again. So here we still get the actual elements back, and so this is the last arrays toString method. If we indicate by printing something like this, oh, my bad. So we are not actually printing them. We just get the elements. So arrays toString returns a string, but we have to print the string. So let's actually do that with this guy here itself. So we actually got what we wanted to get back. Also, we could say like this, we can pass an empty array to let the compiler know what type of objects are underneath. For example, if you have a custom object created like person, which contains a person's name and phone number, and you have a custom toString method written for that object, then the compiler won't know how to print that. So for that, what are the type of objects that you want to get back, or maybe you want to call some custom methods on those objects. So printing toString is fine, but let's say we want to print the lengths of each of these elements. So we want to get an array, and then the same thing that we were doing here, that print the length, we can't do that. So for that, actually, let's see how we can do this. So let's say we do that, and if we expect the string as return type, because we want to call some method on the string, will we be able to do that if we don't pass any type? So it says that incompatible types Java lang object cannot be converted to Java lang string. But if we do this, then the compiler knows what type of object is underneath this array list. So if we run again, it compiles fine, we get the string array back, and on top of that, on top of each of the elements, we can call the string methods. So I think this is a good enough knowledge about ArrayList. So let's actually move on to one LeetCode problem, a simple design problem that we have called Design an Ordered Stream. So let's first read the description of the problem. It says there is a stream of n pairs where each pair contains ID key and value. They are arriving in an arbitrary order, where ID key is an integer between 1 and n and value is a string, and no two pairs have the same ID. So each of them have a unique ID. You have to design a stream that returns the values in increasing order of their IDs by returning a chunk or a list of values after each insertion. The concatenation of all the chunks should result in a list of sorted values. Implement the ordered stream class. You have a constructor which constructs the stream, and you have an insert function which returns an array of the string. So and it's important to read the description. Inserts the pair into the stream, then returns the largest possible chunk of currently inserted values that appear next in the order. So it's more readable if you just go through this animated GIF that they have put. If you just go through it. So let's say at the first, in the beginning, we have the pointer at 0 and we insert an element here. So the first element that we insert is this one at the index 3. At the time our pointer was at 0. So this returns empty. The first insertion returns empty. Then we insert an element at the first location. So at that time we can print this one and then increment the pointer. Then we insert another string at the next index, and at the time we already have elements at location 3 and our pointer is at 2, so we print 2, 3 together and move the pointer to the next location to location 4. So then we insert again element at 5, but the pointer is at 4, so it returns empty, and then we return 4, then we get add an element at 4 and it returns the elements at 4th and 5th location. If you look at all the chunks that are returned, if you just concatenate them, so like this, so that this is the first result that got returned from first call, this is the second result that got returned second call, third call, and so on. If you concatenate all of them, you get them in the sorted order because we are traversing them in that order. So that's, I think, the main constraint that we have, that they have to be, the output have to be in sorted order, and that's what they try to mean here. So let's see how we can do that. So to do that, let's actually copy the code that they have given, and we'll first create a local class so that we can work with it. Say we go here under LeetCode. We can create a new file called ordered stream.java. In here we can copy the stuff that LeetCode has already given us, the bare body of the class, and then we define the package here. And now what do we need here? So first we need something to hold the backing data. So we'll have an array as backing data, and we also need something called a pointer, the pointer that we are keeping to traverse the elements. Once we come here, we'll initialize the array with, it says how many elements will be coming, and we'll also initialize the pointer. So that completes our constructor. Let's also write the test method that we will use to sort of run this function, run this class, I mean. So, and also let's change our invocation to actually invoke this. So now what do we have? Now the main thing, we have to basically implement the insert. Inside insert, it's basically giving us the ID key and value, so the pair that's there. And let's first insert the element into the array. So the ID is actually indexed on 1, but since we are using array, we are indexed at 0. So we'll deduct 1 from here while inserting it. Then we will use the list interface to create the chunk that we need to return. Right? And again, to invoke these, we need the import statements. So LeetCode already does these. So for example, if you're using any Java util classes, they will already add those import statements to your class when they actually run it. So you don't need to add them explicitly. And what do we do here? We check for each element that we are inserting if it is pointing to the same location that the pointer is pointing. If it is, then we'll just keep on checking if the pointer is within the range of the data, and the pointer, the data inside the array data at the location pointer is also not null. We'll add them to the chunk, right? Because we don't know what's the next location it's there, so we'll keep on adding it until we find some location where data is not available, and then we'll just break out of the array. And after that, we'll just return the chunk. So that's actually the interface that they're providing, is they're expecting a list to be returned. So we don't have to convert it to an array. We can just return them. To test it, let's actually run through the same example that they had shared. So in here, what we will do is we'll create an ordered stream object like this, and then we'll insert the elements. Say we'll insert the elements CCC, and there will be 5 inserts. So after first we insert the third element, then we insert the second element. Then we insert the first element, then we insert the second element, then we insert the fifth, and at the last the fourth element. Right. So let's see if it compiles, if there is any compilation error that we get here. So there is no compilation error, but functionally, if it is correct, we have to check that. To check that, we will add some print statements. So we'll add a print function which will basically take the list or the chunk, basically because we are concerned about the chunk, and then it'll print out we'll use the same arrays toString method. We'll convert the chunk to an array in the same way that we have just used. So we convert the chunk to an array, we pass that array to arrays toString, and we pass that string to system out println. So, and we have to import the arrays here. Right, so now we have the print statement. So before returning the chunk, let's just print it if it is actually correct. So what we will do here, each time we insert, we will print the elements, and that's basically what they are doing here. This state, an empty state, then just A, all the A's, then B, then C, and stuff. They have 5 B's, but we have 4 C's. I mean, it's fine. It's anyway a string. So let's just test it. We face a compiler error here. Okay, it says, I think we have missed a bracket here somehow. Oh yeah, we don't need this. Actually, this is a single line statement, so let's not put into multiple lines. It's one line. So you're printing all the contents of a list in one line. So how about that? That's really cool. We are iterating, printing everything in one line. So here we have the elements. After the first insert, it's empty. After the second insert, it's just that. After the second insert, it prints this, then the fourth is empty, then this. So now we have everything. Let's just copy this over to LeetCode and see if it's working on their platform. Just run the code and let's submit it. So yeah, it's got accepted. So that's all we have for today. See you in the next session. Bye bye.